So, picture the scene. The year is roughly 1990. Nintendo reigns the stock market of video games after the undying crash of the video game industry in 1983. However, you hear of one competitor, a small company from Japan, ready to burst its way into your living room as the next generation of home entertainment. Christmas morning comes. Your parents hand you your gift. You open it up. A new console. But it's not Nintendo. You plug it in your TV, you fire it up, and a small blue fast fella comes blazing across the screen at 1,000 miles an hour. This company? SEGA. So, how did such a titan in the video game industry that once went toe-to-toe with Nintendo, something unprecedented by any other company before, fall so hard from grace? Where did SEGA get their start? And ultimately, what went wrong? And why did they flatline? Today, we will be looking at the intro, the middle, and the end of a famous video game company known as SEGA of America. SEGA's intro to this entire story is rather an interesting and peculiar one. Founded in 1951, a company called Service Games would go on to make various arcade-based mechanical machines and slot machines for the American military in Hawaii. They would go on to make a plethora of minigames and fun intros and titles, one of their most famous being Periscope, a subway simulator where you pilot the inside of a subway launching torpedoes at various enemies. Shortly after, they would go on to Japan, only to meet a small company called Rosen Enterprises that would make various printing machines and photocopies for photo IDs of various results. There, they would merge with Rosen Enterprises to create SEGA Incorporated. From there on, SEGA would be well known and acclaimed for their intro in the arcade video game market, with famous hits such as Zaxxon, Turbo, and Buck Rogers. From there, SEGA realized that they had a foot in the door, being one of the heads of some of the most popular arcade games on the planet. From there, this is where they would go on to infiltrate your living room and make their first home console, the SG-100. Unfortunately, however, SEGA would go on to do this at probably the worst time possible, during the video game crash of 1983. This video game crash was supplemented by various unregulated ideas and companies simply trying to get a mere cash grab at the video game shares. At the time, most video games were very lackluster and the quality of these games was utter garbage. It was around this time that the SG-100 would be known as an utter failure, so much so that it actually never made it officially into the United States of America. This was due to Nintendo's Famicom, a gaming system that would then be known more popularly as the NES, or the Nintendo Entertainment System here in America. The Nintendo Entertainment System was labeled differently as opposed to other video game consoles of its era. It was not originally labeled a video game console or system. It was actually labeled an entertainment hub for your family. This was because Nintendo knew that various companies would not want to stock video games anymore, as the video game crash proved, in a weird sense, that video games might be dead forever. Therefore, why would any company like Walmart or any other mega superstore carry video games when there could potentially be a massive loss or failure for them? This is why Nintendo never actually advertised the NES as a video game console outright, but instead an entertainment hub, hence Nintendo Entertainment System. This would also go on to be one of Nintendo's biggest strengths and the reasons why Nintendo revitalized the video game market after the crash of '83. Because think about it, if you went and really bought a video game system as well as maybe like 5 or 6 games for a couple $100 and they sucked and blew garbage, would you really want to try video games again? I gave it a shot one time and it was trash, so what makes it not trash the second time, right? And that's kind of what Nintendo was going for. They wanted to make sure people understood that this wasn't anything but a video game system so that people would subsequently start getting back into the video game industry without even really knowing it at the time. This is because they included things such as Rob the Robot, an interactive toy that actually synced with your Nintendo system in order to play games as he would do certain movements in real time. The Nintendo Zapper, which was a famous light gun that they actually introduced to shoot on the screen with CRT televisions such as Duck Hunt and things like that, and other shooting games that were popular of their time, and of course the Nintendo Entertainment System in itself. So in a weird funny sense, we can actually say and claim that the video game industry was single-handedly revitalized by Nintendo themselves. That is, until a very small and fast blue fellow makes an appearance. Or maybe not, because if you blink, you might miss him. So, once again, in 1986, SEGA actually tried once more at creating a home entertainment console system, which they would later be calling it in Japan as the Mega Drive. This would become known in the States as the Sega Genesis. However, this would still cause some pretension and issues for SEGA. At first, believe it or not, the Sega Mega Drive / Genesis actually didn't sell very well. This was because at first, Nintendo held so much of the market share that, believe it or not, if you wanted to make games for Nintendo, you had to go through Nintendo themselves and get their seal of approval. This was done in part because Nintendo knew that what made the video game crash of '83 happen in the first place was the oversaturation of terrible and utter garbage games, so they did not want a repeat of this all over again. Therefore, this meant that most people would just go to Nintendo because Nintendo was bigger and already more stabilized in the industry, and pretty much the scraps would just go to Sega. And while at first the Sega Mega Drive wouldn't go on to be a popular success, it did provide some pretty solid titles like Afterburner and Mega Drive. An airplane simulator that, believe it or not, had pretty good graphics for its time. It was actually around this time, however, that Sega noticed they needed a mascot to compete with Nintendo, one that could go toe-to-toe with Mario and in likeness. Their answer was in a game called Alex the Kid, which is essentially a Mario knockoff in a way where you had a person just going around hitting different monsters, but at the same time had its own little charm, as there was very peculiar elements about it. For example, you could drive vehicles, pogo sticks, motorcycles, and even a car. This is exactly around the time, however, when they realized that Alex the Kid wasn't really doing as well as they hoped. This is around the time when a particular furry friend made by Yuji Naka, aka Mr. Needlemouse, would make the scene, ultimately having major flaws and changes done to him to make him more known commonly as Sonic the Hedgehog. This was actually around the time when a man named Tom Skolinski would actually become the CEO of SEGA Incorporated. This man was famously known for revitalizing the Barbie franchise, the Hot Wheels franchise, and helping create the famous TV show He-Man Masters of the Universe. Knowing that this man had prior experience in revitalizing different companies, while he wasn't a gamer, he was one thing, a visionary, allowing him to do basically whatever he wanted and have full control over Sega Incorporated. He was single-handedly able to revitalize Sega's brand name in the West and pretty much everywhere else. He had 4 points of pretension. Number 1, advertising. Make ads that were appealing to people in the West rather than just Japan themselves. Number 2, make great games and make sure that there was a reason for people to actually buy a Sega Genesis as opposed to just a Nintendo. Number 3 was to actually cut the price of the Sega Genesis from originally $189 to only $149, giving it a little bit of a push. And number 4, and probably the biggest and most important decision he made, was to package Sonic the Hedgehog as the included game with the Sega Genesis instead of Altered Beast or Alex the Kid. This actually allowed Sega's sales to go to 15 million and match Nintendo's sales in the West. However, this would actually be the small and slow downfall of Sega themselves. You see, as time went on, a lot of the Sega development team actually didn't agree with Tom Skolinski or his plans to revitalize Sega at all. Ultimately, in the later years to come, when they would go on to work on their next big hit, or sort of, the Sega Saturn, they would actually take very little to almost no advice or recommendations from Tom Skolinski himself, even though Yuji Naka had actually given him full control and was supposed to let him reign how he pretty much wanted. So, over the years, Tom Skolinski would actually start to fade out of existence in the image of Sega of America, as Sega of America and Sega of Japan didn't really meet eye to eye in almost any case. Not to mention, the Sega Saturn wasn't really selling that well, and they had to find a new system and make one fast. This is where they entered a corporation called Silicon Graphics, and Silicon Graphics had actually asked Nintendo to advertise their graphics and put it in their next system. However, Sega of Japan had more power over Sega of America, therefore they didn't accept that offer. This graphic chipset would unironically become known as the Nintendo 64, Sega Saturn's rival and arguably the better console. With Tom Skalinski slowly fading out of the picture of Sega of America and Sega of Japan, he was starting to get a little restless and frustrated as they were losing sales and honestly, just fading out of existence. It wasn't until one final event when Nintendo had actually planned to partner with Sony originally and didn't want to because it would give Sony a lot of the shares that Nintendo didn't want them to have. Therefore, Sony had actually offered to team up with Sega of America to create a new CD-based system, one that could play games using, well, a CD. And of course, Sega of Japan didn't want to do this and they eventually denied this offer. This system would become known as the PlayStation 1. So, with no one really listening to Tom Skalinski, he had no choice but to just pretty much leave Sega and let them do to their own devices, which would actually be where Sega would fail. With two new systems having just been created, that being the Nintendo 64, the N64, and the PS1, it was kind of hard for Sega to keep up and compete with their competitors. It wasn't until the Sega Dreamcast, Sega's last and ultimate final console, and their last push into the home entertainment system and making its way into your living room would eventually fail and dwindle out. This wasn't the case forever, however. In the beginning stages, in only the first 4 days, the Sega Dreamcast would actually go on to sell 375,000 units, a very impressive number, especially by those standards at the time. But after a year though, it really didn't work out as well, and the Sega Dreamcast eventually faded out of existence. So to put it all in retrospect, honestly, while the Sega Dreamcast was a very highly advanced and capable machine, it was arguably a little too advanced. It had things such as online play. It had things such as 64-bit graphics, and believe it or not, it actually ran a beta and older version of Windows CE, something that would eventually come to bite it in the butt. So clearly, while the hardware and the concepts were there, everything else pretty much wasn't, and this is what led the Sega Dreamcast to fade out of existence. Not to mention, this was around 2001 when one particular company would make the best-selling console of all time, the Sony PlayStation 2. So, what is Sega of America today? Where are they at now? Well, to put it simply, they've given up their hopes and dreams of console gaming dominance behind, and for now, they simply just make video games for all kinds of major platforms such as Xbox, PlayStation, and of course, the champions, Nintendo. Well, ultimately, I hope you guys liked this little 15-minute documentary I've compiled together for you guys to enjoy. Sega was once a titan in the video game industry, but now is a mere shell of its former self. Anyways, guys, this took me a while to make. Leave a like, thumbs up, subscribe. I hope you guys have a fantastic Saturday, and until then, stay hyper. Peace out. Bye-bye.